I agree with
I
that.
don't know, it might build a fire under us. Keep our nose to the grindstone.
Oh yeah, you know, for better or worse, I'm not that kind of a teacher. Maybe I should be, but no, that's more. It's more just like for my own self, because this is a level of administrative and logistical complexity that's a little bit above my pay grade. So
Plus, it's your bar mitzvah.
right. Plus, it's my bar mitzvah.
Hopefully we have Rachel to handle the logistics.
Exactly. So Rachel is such a godsend.
Yes.
She's just amazing. So I want to talk. So the other news is that given the fact that the restrictions are beginning to fall, I think we can say that Lori, that Stephen can come, and Mayim, that William can come, and Romney and Mallory, if you feel comfortable being in person, then I would love to welcome you.
Okay.
Obviously, we would understand if you don't.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Helen, did you want to bring somebody? I forget.
Yes, I was bringing my daughter.
Great, lovely. And Fred is going to bring his daughter Lynn, so that's lovely.
There may be an in-person coming as a guest.
For you.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. Just let me know who that person is. And as I said, the real requirement is that they be vaccinated.
Oh yes.
And then at this point, staff and visitors are still required to wear masks. I think by that point, residents will not be. I would hope that staff and visitors could be maskless at that point as well, but we will see. And I think what we'll do is that when people come up to do their part of the service, we will have people remove their mask so that the world can actually see what they're saying and hear what as clearly as possible.
Rabbi, can I just know, is it June 19th?
No, it's June. June
12th.
June 12th.
12.
Saturday, June 12th.
Saturday, June 12th, exactly. All right, great. And so rabbinic literature. So, this is my attempt to distill, more than 2,000 years of rabbinic tradition into half an hour or so.
Cliff notes.
We'll see what we can do. All right, so we're going to start with something that probably several of you have seen at some point. We'll start with a mission. Attempt to distill, more than two. Okay, there we go. Okay, let me find it. So this is from Pirkei Avot, which is part of the Mishnah. And don't worry about those words quite yet. I'll get to those in a minute. The structure of rabbinical literature is quite interesting, not least of all because there are, as with everything else in Judaism, right, a whole range of dates, genres, times, pseudonyms, traditions, so on and so forth. So we'll get to that in just a moment. But I just want to read, this is the beginning of Pirkei Avot. What Pirkei means the chapters. Avot is the word for fathers. So Pirkei Avot is the chapters of the fathers, or the wisdom of the fathers. And it is a collection of rabbinic wisdom, lore, traditions that traditionally Jews will study between Passover and Shavuot, or between Passover and the high holidays. Every Shabbos, you study one of the 6 chapters, and you just keep on going, sort of in rotation over and over and over again. So it's one of the best known pieces of rabbinic literature because it's studied all the time. All right, so I'll just read this first one. I'm going to read it in Hebrew, and then maybe Lori will read it in English.
Sure.
Great. Moshe kibel Torah miSinai u'mesarah, and pay attention to that word, u'mesarah, lihoshua. Vihoshua lizkenim, uzkenim linviim, unviim misaruha, le'anshe Knesset Hagadola. Hem amru shlosha devarim. Let's see, whoever's phone is on, could you mute yourself? Is that my phone? Maybe it's my phone. I don't know what's going on. Okay. Havu mitunim badim v'hamidu talmidim harbe v'asu siag la Torah. So go ahead, Lori.
Moses received the Torah at Sinai and transmitted it to Joshua, Joshua to the elders, and the elders to the prophets, and the prophets to the men of the great assembly. They said 3 things: be patient in the administration of justice, raise many disciples, and make a fence around the Torah.
Phenomenal. All right, so I'm not going to say a lot about this because as anyone who, if you're interested in this, some of my Jewish learning classes were put onto the YouTube, and you can look at them because we discuss these in great detail. These are the kind of texts that it's very easy to spend an hour discussing each one of these, what are called the Mishnayot, meaning each one of these little pieces, because they're sort of infinitely deep. But I'm just going to point out a few things, right? That where did the Torah come from?
God.
Yes, right. It came from God.
Moses.
Right. It came from God, but it came. That is assumed here, right? I mean, I'm not certainly not going to deny it, right? But that is assumed here, right? It came from me. It came from Sinai, Sinai, right? So very important, right? That and when we say Torah, what are we talking about?
Everything.
Everything. So when you say everything, Anne, what do you mean by everything?
I'm told what we call the Torah, plus all of the study and learning and everything that goes with it.
Great, right. So Torah has sort of two we talked about this before, right? In our classes about Torah, right? But what's important to know here, right, is that the reason that they are talking about Torah here, Sinai, right, is that for the rabbis, it's very important for us to understand that there are 2 Torahs, right? And the 2 Torahs of the rabbis are not the written Torah and then everything else, right? Although that is true, it's the written Torah, Torah Sheba'al Peh, and the oral Torah. Torah Shebiktav, and the oral Torah, Torah Sheba'al Peh. Right? And why do we need such a thing? Why do we need to have Torah Sheba'al Peh?
Because many people couldn't read, for one thing.
Okay, very good. So many people couldn't read. So there were lots and lots of oral traditions. Right?
But we didn't forget.
Well, that's what's really interesting, right? That's what's really interesting. Is that we have a written Torah, right? We have a written Torah that's written down, right? And we've talked in this class and many other places, right? That we Jews never throw anything away, right? So we have in the Torah all these things that if we were writing the Torah today, would we have them?
Have them online.
No way, right? Right? Not even close, right? So, but our tradition doesn't change the Torah,
Can't talk later.
right? Our tradition doesn't change the Torah. It keeps the written Torah exactly the same.
But another reason that you probably need the oral Torah is if one of the recommendations is that you make a fence around the Torah, presumably so that it can't be corrupted, the written Torah, then you need some way for the common person to access what's in it.
Exactly. That you are putting it in a very interesting way, Lori, that I hadn't really thought about, but I think it's very important, right? Which is that, yes, the written Torah doesn't change, right? So when the written Torah, right, no longer makes sense as conditions change, right? For instance, like the biggest one that the rabbis were dealing with, right, is that there was no that the temple was destroyed, right? If the primary way that we communicate with God is through animal sacrifice, right, and animal sacrifice becomes impossible, right, because the temple is destroyed, what do you do? Right? What do you do? So you need to, at that point, right, you need to have a way of, as Lori put it, accessing the Torah, right, of making sense of the Torah that's written down in a context where it doesn't make obvious sense, right? And so we see this all the time, right? And for the rabbis, it became very important, right, that we have this oral Torah in addition to the written Torah to deal with exactly situations, like what do we do now? What do we do now that the temple is destroyed? When in the Torah it says, remember we talked about this, you should not seethe a kid in its mother's milk. What does that mean, right? Does it really mean separate dishes for milk products and meat products? Maybe it does, but the oral Torah is what allows us to get to those decisions, right? The other thing about the oral Torah, right, which is very interesting, is that in the Talmud, the oral Torah will often find itself in conflict with itself. Rabbi Zera said, you do it this way, right? That we have that in a tradition, right? But somewhere else, Rabbi Zera says we do it the other way, right? So which one is the real Rabbi Zera, right? What is the actual tradition, right? So the rabbis at that point have three choices, right? They can say Rabbi Zera A is the proper one. Rabbi Zera B is the proper one, right? Or they're both correct under certain.
Standard Jewish answer is it depends.
Right. That Jewish answer is not a new answer, right? That's not like since Lenny Bruce type of Jewish answer, right? There's a reason that's the Jewish answer, and that's because of this tradition of Talmudic reasoning. Right.
Can I ask a brief sort of side question based on what you read in the Hebrew? The word mesarah,
Yeah.
is that where the quote Masorti movement in England comes from?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
And the Misorah means the tradition, right, or the transmission of tradition, right? And so it's a very important word. And this,
I always wondered where the Stephen's British relatives who talk about being Masorti.
yes, right, and it is also the Masorti movement in Israel is the Masorti.
Right.
It's the international. It's sort of like the Reform movement in Israel is not the Reform movement; it's the Progressive Jewish Alliance or whatever, right? And the conservative movement isn't conservative; it's Masorti. So yeah, just
Got it.
yeah. All right. So, but that word, thank you for bringing back to that word, because that is a very important word, right? Because it only appears twice in this, right? It only appears twice in this, right? So it becomes, I think, and as I said, I only noticed it this year, and I haven't looked it to see if other commentators have made any hay of this, but it seems to me that it's not unimportant that the two people, right, who get the verb, so to speak, who have the honor of actually talking about their transmission, right, is Moses, right, and later the prophets, right, and so that these two people, or Moses and then the prophets, right, these are the folks who are immortalized in the Bible, right, with having had their own voices, so to speak.
And do you know why Joshua doesn't get that as well?
That's a great question, right? It's a great question. I don't know, but I came up with a little bit of a theory in the last time I taught this, right? Is that those are two major inflection points, right? Right. We have the transmission of Torah from God to Moses at Sinai, right? And that is the whole of the written Torah and also the whole of the oral Torah. Right? Of course, it's not exactly clear, right, what since it's the oral Torah, right, there's no 100% complete collection of the oral Torah, right? And much of what it constitutes the oral Torah is arguments about the oral Torah, right? But then the next big inflection point, right, is the prophets, right? And my suspicion, right, is that for the rabbis of Pirkei Avot, right, whoever it was that redacted Pirkei Avot, right, that the third major inflection point was the rabbis, right, and that the rabbinic system was as much of a momentous shift, right, in the life of Bnei Yisrael as was the giving of Torah at Sinai, right, and the many changes that accompanied prophecy. So we can't get too deeply into this, otherwise we'll spend the whole time, right? But it is very interesting, right, how we'll see in the next one here, right, that Shimon the righteous was one of the last men of the Great Assembly. The men of the Great Assembly are presumed to be Ezra and Nehemiah and the people who gathered the Israelites back in Jerusalem after the Babylonian exile, right? So this is already at the time of, everything here is recording, it's because the men of the Great Assembly have said these three things, right? That all of this stuff is post-exilic, right? It's taking for granted a Jewish community that has lost its geographial center, right? And the men of the Great Assembly, right, are the ones who reconstitute that, right, and make up the second temple, right? But the rabbis, again, they see themselves, right, as part of this project, right, of reconstituting the Jewish community, right, as something new, right, something new, out of the old. Right? But what's really important, right, what's really important is the continuity, right? So that's why there's this big line of transmission, right? Because everything that the rabbis are saying, even if it seems completely and radically and unequivocally at odds, even contradicting the written Torah, right? It still has continuity all the way back to Moses. Right. So what does Shimon the Righteous say? The world stands on three things: on Torah, on temple service, avodah, right? The word for work, right, or labor in Hebrew, and the practice of acts of piety, right? So what we have here, right, are the three pillars of Israel, right? Torah, God. Torah is about Torah. Temple service is about God, and acts of piety, right, are what we do for one another, right? Gimilut chasadim, right, are things that we do for each other.
So temple service means doing service to God or the temple, not the way we use the words going to services on Shabbat.
That's a great question, Lori. It's exactly the right question, right? And that is, again, when I'm talking about this emphasis in the rabbis on continuity, right? That's exactly it, right? So Shimon the Righteous is one of the last men of the Great Assembly, right? So he has rebuilt the temple service, right? He's one of the people that has arranged for the rebuilding of the temple, right? The reestablishment of avodah, right? Of avodah, of service. Now, that's also what the rabbis think they're doing, right? So the rabbis come along after the destruction of the temple, right? And they say, we have avodah, right? We have the actual avodah, right, of the priests, right? But we also have the avodah shebalev, right? The holy service that's of the heart, right? And so, as we may have discussed, I can't remember that far back. I can't remember even last week. So, but when we were discussing the prayer service, right? Each of the times we say the Amidah corresponds to one of the sacrifices in the temple. So for the rabbis, avodah is exactly what we do, right? That's why we call it services, Lori. Right? We call it services davka because it's service to God. So, yeah, go ahead, Ann.
At this point, does the temple service include the animal sacrifices or not?
In the second temple?
Well, I guess when the temple was still standing, first or second.
Right. Presumably, yes. I mean, I'm not enough of a historian to argue one way or the other on that, but I'm just, at least from a traditional perspective, they definitely did, right? And remember, right, that the other important piece to remember, right, I think, sort of the fundamental reality of religion, right, is that religion has to constantly evolve without ever seeming to change, right? So it has to be maximally flexible and evolutionary and also maximally conservative, right? So, which is why, right, when we, congregations tend to get into habits, right? We call them customs, right? And it can be very difficult to change the custom, right? Very difficult to change the custom.
So by that time, they've incorporated something in addition to the sacrifice.
Well, right. So there were well, actually, that's a whole other question, right? Having to do with the Torah and Deuteronomy, right? When was the first time there was a major revolution in the idea of the temple service, right? It was in the work of Deuteronomy, right?
After the temples were destroyed.
No, there was no temple. Is that what you said? The other temples
after the second temple was destroyed.
No, Deuteronomy probably happened. It's pre-exilic.
Really?
Deuteronomy is pre-exilic. And so, but in Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers, right, there's no indication, right, that there would only be one place to make a sacrifice, right? So wherever you were, you know, there was a local temple, right? And there's evidence of that throughout Joshua and Judges and Kings and all that kind of stuff. And at a certain point, Hezekiah, the king Hezekiah, discovers a scroll in the temple that says that the only temple should be the one in Jerusalem, right? That's a pretty big shift, right? And so there's a lot of arguments and violence concerned with, well, where is God going to dwell, right? Is God going to dwell everywhere where there is a temple, right? Even outside of the land of Israel, right? In Elephantine in Egypt, there was a Jewish temple, right? Or is there only one proper place for the temple, and that is Jerusalem, right? But they can't just make that change, right? They have to have a holy book, right, that establishes that as the case, so that they are being conservative and not radical. All right. All right. So, and finally, right, one of the big ways that the rabbis are changing Judaism, right, is also theological, right? They're changing the nature of God, right? So in the sort of common way of thinking about, maybe I should say the Christian way, right, of thinking about the transition from biblical religion to post-biblical religion, right? The time right around, say, the time that the rabbinic literature was beginning to be written down, or maybe when the first gospels were being written down, right? Or the letters of Paul, right? Great influence of Greek thought and Greek religion, right? It became very important, right, that God not be the biblical God, right? The God that we all gnash our teeth about in the Torah, right? The nasty, jealous, vindictive God, right? That seems ready at any moment to destroy God's people, right? We need a nicer God than that, right? This is nothing new, right? This is nothing new, right? And this is one of the reasons why I think that the prophets get that nod, because one of the big changes the prophets make, right, is to soften the image of God, right? God becomes more loving. God becomes less tied to one single place. God goes into exile with God's people. And God doesn't, God stops being only about punishment, right? So that was something the prophets had long done, right? When the Christian Jews come along, you know, that nice boy Saul, you know, gave up on the Jews and decided he was going to be Christian, right? One of the things he did, right, was to emphasize two aspects, right, he wants to emphasize that prophetic version of God, right, with emphasis on Isaiah, right, and he wants to, in contradistinction, right, to the Jewish idea of God, right. And he also wants to do exactly what the rabbis want to do, right? He wants to establish something new, right, with great continuity to something old. So in Christianity, right, eventually what we end up with is the New Testament, which is both a continuation and a rejection of the old one, right? And what we have in Judaism, right, in Rabbinic Judaism as we know it, right, is essentially the same thing, but the rabbis are really going to focus on the continuity piece, right? They're not gonna say that there's a new person, right? This Jesus guy, right, who is the new dispensation, right? It's the same old God, but we understand him differently.
So I'm getting more hung up about this fence around the Torah part. How did the rabbis, how was it decided? How was it allowed? I don't know what verb I want here. That you can change the description, the image of God, if the Torah's in a vault. Or is it a chain link fence with holes in it so you can get your way in?
I mean, it's fascinating to me, Lori, that is your image of the fence around the Torah.
It wasn't until we read this today.
Yeah. No, I'm saying that I'm fascinated by this reading because it's so illuminating, and it has nothing to do with the traditional understanding of what a Siag LaTorah is.
Right. What's his name? Rabbi Saul Berman, who has spoken at Hillel many times,
Yes.
always speaks about fence around the Torah as something negative.
Right. Right. And I right. And because he comes at it from an Orthodox Jewish feminist perspective, right? That you're not supposed to put a fence around the Torah to keep people out, right? That you're supposed to put a fence around the Torah to protect the rules of the Torah.
Right.
So if so the classic one is, it's about, one of the classic ones is, it's not actually illegal to play a musical instrument on Shabbat necessarily, right? But it is against the rules to repair a musical instrument on Shabbat. So you don't play it, God forbid it breaks and you're tempted to fix it, right? That's really that's the traditional.
Yeah, got it.
But you're bringing up Rabbi Berman's, right, idea, right, that that a fence around the Torah is an impediment to Torah, right? And I really like that, right, as a sort of a how can we make use of that image, right? Because on one hand, yeah, we do want to protect the Torah, right? We do want to make sure that the Torah doesn't change, right? And but I think what's important here is that the text of the Torah does not change. Our understanding of the Torah is forever changing, right? And so if we understand a fence around the Torah as being the Mesorah, right, the tradition, right, of how the Torah is written and read, and I mean read in terms of what the words are, right, according to the Masoretes, again, that same word, right, the keepers of the tradition, right? It's actually, that's the fence that really matters, because if we could just change the Torah willy-nilly whenever we wanted to, right, there would be no foundational text for us to come back to, right, to base changes, right? And that's one of the very big distinctions, right, between the Jewish and the Christian view of the Bible, right? Because by and large, this is a gross generalization, so please forgive me, right? Very often, right, in Christianity, right, we get there is this sort of sense of the text being fixed, right? The Bible says, right? You hear that all the time from our Christian brothers and sisters, right? The Bible says X, right? Whether we agree with what they say or not, right? Where the Jewish, we don't kind of do that sort of literal reading thing as being the beginning and the end of understanding what the Torah is about. All right, so I'm going to stop now on this. I'd like to continue talking about this topic, but we've talked already longer about this text than I wanted to. So let's get back to the question of rabbinical literature. So the Mishnah was put down in writing around 200 of the Common Era, and it purports, right, to be the oral Torah, or at least some of the oral Torah. And it's divided into it's divided into 6 orders. And I forget the number of tractates off the top of my head. But in the 6 orders, there are many tractates. And if we have time next week, and I'll actually go through, what are the orders, but I think that's less important. That's not the top line information that you need to know. What's more important to know is that there is a whole corpus of other manuscripts that also include very similar material. Those are by and large called baraitas, meaning outside traditions. Right? An equally ancient tradition, right? That is not found in the Mishnah. So this is where we get to this problem that I mentioned before, right? We have tradition A about Rabbi Zera, and we have tradition B about Rabbi Zera. Right? How do we know which one is right? Right. So that's why we have the Talmud. Right. So the Mishnah is written down around, as I said, 200 of the Common Era. Over the next number of centuries, remember at this point that there's 2 sort of big centers of Jewish scholarship in the land of Israel, right, which is severely runs into major trouble in the Bar Kokhba rebellion. Right, many people are killed by the Romans. Right, so in the land of Israel, and then in Babylonia, right, that place that used to be exile, right, and is still at this point was considered exile, right, but that this is where it really becomes diaspora, right, where we begin to, there was continual Israelite / Jewish presence in Babylonia from the destruction of the first temple, right, up until just a couple decades ago. Right. One of the great tragedies, right, that Babylonia no longer has Jews. So in these great centers, right, of Jewish learning, right, there was a process of Talmud, right? Talmud is the word for study. So if you say Talmud Torah, that means Torah study. And the Talmud, there's 2 different Talmuds. One came together in the land of Israel. It's called the Jerusalem Talmud. The other one came together in Babylonia, so it's called the Babylonian Talmud. The Jerusalem Talmud is much smaller. It's much, for me at least, much more difficult to understand. And it's much less finished, but it was finally, they stopped working on it like in the 5th century of the Common Era. And in
They stopped working on it when? The 5th century?
5th century of the Common Era. The Babylonian Talmud is much larger. It's still difficult to understand, but much, for me at least, a lot easier than the Jerusalem Talmud. And it was finally, put to rest in the 6th or 7th century of the Common Era. not every tractate of the Mishnah has a corresponding Gemara, right? So the Talmud consists really only of tractates that have that. I mean, all the tractates are Mishnayot, right? But if there's not a Gemara, then it's not part of the Talmud. And there's fewer of the tractates in the Jerusalem Talmud. There's fewer tractates in the Jerusalem Talmud than in the Babylonian. And the Talmud is not only about laws and legal material, right? It's also a compendium of stories, of midrashim, right? Midrash is a whole other category of rabbinic literature that has to do with the Bible, right? It's interpretations of the Bible. It's retellings of the Bible. It's filling in places in the Bible that are not there.
When you say Bible, do you mean the first 5 books?
No, I mean the whole
thing.
Yeah. Right. So for instance, like the story of Daniel, right? There'll be interpretations of that in various places. Okay, so that's the Talmud, right? And the Talmud is an amazing document. And next week, we will study a little bit of Talmud. If I can do it in time, I'm still relearning a piece of Talmud with a friend of mine. I don't think I'll have it. Well, we'll see. We'll see if I can do it. I'll do it. If I can't, we'll do something else. And you can get a sense of what the Talmud is like. So any questions at this point? Great to see you, Mallory. I'm glad that
We really want to try to make it in person, Rabbi.
That'd be great. That'd be
Okay.
great. Love to see
Good luck, everyone. It's very exciting.
Yeah,
Thank
great.
you.
Well, maybe
Okay.
we'll see you next week too, Mallory.
I'll be in Virginia seeing my mom, so
Oh.
but maybe I'll get Romney to join.
Oh, next week, you mean?
Yes.
Got it. Okay, good.
Okay.
Good.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Yeah. Go ahead. Was that Ann? Oh, Ellen, sorry. You're muted, Ellen. Ellen, you're muted. Maya, why don't you ask your question while Ellen is getting herself unmuted?
I didn't have any questions at this
Okay,
time.
I thought I heard someone. Did someone say something and I just missed it? No? Okay.
Unmute.
Yeah, you have to, you're having trouble unmuting, I see, Ellen. Yeah.
Can't hear you.
Yeah, you're still muted. Yeah, she can't.
Okay.
Yeah. All right, Ellen, just when you figure out how to unmute yourself, you'll let us know. Oh, we lost her entirely. Hopefully she'll come back. Okay. All right, so any questions about that material so far?
Probably lots. There was a lot there that was unfamiliar to me.
Yeah. All right, so this is on YouTube. You can look at it again, or you can just ask me to repeat myself. You know me. It's always happy to hear myself talk. So.
Well, I'm enjoying reading Milton Steinberg's book a lot, and maybe there's a part coming up that is going to get into the diaspora and the Mishnah and all that. I don't know.
Yeah.
I haven't gotten to that yet, but he might cover it.
If you cover it, you'll have what to ask me about. Exactly.
But that's a great book, and I'm enjoying it very much. And
Which one? The Basic Judaism?
Yeah.
Oh, you got to read As a Driven Leaf too.
Yeah, As a Driven Leaf is definitely worth reading.
Definitely.
Yeah, and also The Orchard by Yochi Brandis it's kind of an updating of As a Driven Leaf. Same characters, but from a 21st century and feminist perspective rather than, the mid-century.
Sounds like Maya might enjoy the 1,000,001 book.
I think Maya would, actually.
Oh, I think I took a look at that. Yeah, Sherry told me a little bit about it. Yeah. I don't know. Was The Driven Leaf also by Milton Steinberg?
Yes.
Okay.
It's a wonderful book. Helps you understand the temple destruction period.
Okay. While we're talking about books, I'm also enjoying the Kushner about words. That's really good. Yeah.
Great. No, that's a lovely thing. All right. Good. So let's look at the what's the word I'm looking for? The prayer, the brachas for the
Torah blessings.
Torah blessings. Sorry.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to be doing that. So maybe I don't. I need to stay for something at this time.
If you don't, Mime, I'd like to have a conversation with you, so I can call you afterwards if you don't want to stick around.
Did you want me to do an Aliyah?
I mean, if you feel up for it, I would love for you to do it.
I'm still not quite sure what's involved there.
All right, so let's go to it and.
Okay.
I also wanted to know, I didn't think I was doing it. I said I would if you needed it, but.
I mean, my attitude is that everyone should do it. Everyone should do it who would have any potential interest in it. Should definitely do it. And if we end up with more people than there are aliyot, then we can, people can go up. Like Lori, you very graciously invited Ellen Soro to come up with you. She was very touched that you offered her that opportunity. And if you need help with the blessings, then you can you can just ask someone to come up with you and help you. Yeah, go ahead, Ann.
I have to go in a minute. If you want, I'll give this blessing a try.
Great, go for it.
Baruch Adonai Hamborach. Baruch Adonai Hamborach. Baruch Adonai. Baruch Adonai Hamborach Le'olam Bayed. Baruch Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bahar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et torto. Baruch Adonai noten haTorah. And then afterwards,
go ahead, keep on going.
Baruch Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bahar natan lanu Torah emet v'hayim olam v'totenu Baruch Adonai noten haTorah.
Great. All right. So just a couple of notes. The first one is that you say Baruch et Adonai Hamvorach, right? When as you're holding on to the Eitzei Chaim, as you're holding on to the Torah sticks, right? The sticks that are holding the Torah.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a couple other a couple of that, and then the congregation will say Baruch Adonai, right? And then the person taking the aliyah repeats that line. Right. Baruch Adonai Hamvarach Le'olam Vayed. So it's very easy when you're in the heat of the moment, right? And you're nervous about having to say this thing that you'll jump right to the Baruch Atah, right? You don't jump right to the Baruch Atah. You need to remember to say Baruch Adonai Hamvarach Le'olam Vayed, right? And then you said the first one perfectly, Anne, and the second one is much trickier. Where when we're planting eternal life in our midst, it's not so easy to say. V'chaye olam, v'chaye olam atah b'tochei. but other than that was great.
Okay.
Been a long time since I've done it.
Yeah, no, it sounded amazing. So yes, so to back up, right, a little bit on this, when you're called up to the Torah, oh, that reminds me, when you're called up to the Torah, what's going to happen is you will be called. Probably Rachel will be the gabbai, unless we have. I've asked Susan. I can't remember if I actually got to ask Susan or not. But Susan or Rachel will say ta'amod, which means she stands up, right? She stands up, and then we will need to have your Hebrew names ahead of time. And that way the gabbai can just say your Hebrew name, as opposed to the more typical way, right? Which is that the person comes up there and you say your first name, and the gabbai repeats it, and then you say your parents' name, or parents' names, the way we tend to do it, and then she repeats it. So this way, so Rachel will say it's me. Right, Rachel would be able to say Harav Yitzchak ben Avraham v'Sarah. Now mine is easy. Rachel's is hard. So probably, unless I had it up in front of me, I would have to say Harav Naftalia Gittel Bat something Lev something, right? So so when each of the people has two names, these things can get kind of long, right? So if you don't have or don't know your Hebrew name, you should talk to me, and we will figure it out. You go ahead, Ann.
Bye.
You got to go.
I'll
Ann,
send you my
you
Hebrew
gonna get
name.
available at all later today?
After 4, I have two
Right.
more Zoom meetings for the next 2 hours.
Oh, you're a glutton for punishment.
I am. Every Friday it goes on.
All right,
Zoom meetings. Okay, bye-bye.
all right. So why don't
Bye.
everybody? This is the how many people we got? We got. Okay, so why don't we have everybody? I wish Ellen were here, but I guess let me see if we can get her back.
So Jim, do you know if the plan is for Ellen to read the transliteration or to just come up and be there?
I think to read ideally to read the transliteration, ideally, yeah.
Okay.
But she doesn't have to do it at volume, So, all right. So everyone can just repeat after me. Baruch et Torah. And I'm not going to try to correct anybody. You'll just do your best. Uh-oh, I lost it. What did I have? There we go. All right. There we go. One more time. Baruch et Torah.
Adonai Hamborach.
Great. And then and feel free to just read it off the transliteration if the Hebrew is too complicated. Okay. Baruch Adonai Hamborach le'olam va'ed.
Baruch Adonai Hamborach le'olam va'ed.
Baruch Adonai Hamborach
Baruch Adonai Hamborach.
le'olam va'ed.
Adonai Hamborach le'olam va'ed.
Great. All right. So the next one. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam.
Asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim.
Asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. Asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim.
Baruch Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. Asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim.
V'natan lanu et Torato.
Natan lanu et Torato.
Baruch Ata Adonai.
Baruch
Baruch atah Adonai,
Noten HaTorah.
noten haTorah.
Atah.
All right, Laura, are you willing to try?
Oh,
Or do you want to know it?
I'm actually pretty comfortable with this.
Awesome. Okay, great. I couldn't
So
remember.
I was going to just wait and say goodbye and wish everyone a Shabbat Shalom.
Good job,
Okay.
Lori. Great to
Good
see
to
you.
see you, Lori.
And
Bye.
Jim, I'll send you my Hebrew name.
Perfect. Thank you. So, Fred, a little bit of update for you. That Kent is not going to be able to be in person. She won't be fully vaccinated at that point. So she's going to be she's going to be in on Zoom. So you will do the maftir aliyah. So I'm hoping you're comfortable with it. And if you're feeling a little uncomfortable, you can come up with your daughter, or we can figure that out. All right. So since you're muted, I can't hear you do it. But okay. So I'm just going to point out then,
No.
Helen and Mayim, right? That if you look at the second blessing, right?
Yes.
You'll see that the first line is exactly the same.
Yes,
And the second line the third line is exactly the same.
yeah.
Okay. So you just have to worry about the middle line.
Asher natan lanu.
Yeah. Asher natan lanu Torat emet.
Asher natan lanu Torah.
Emet.
Right. And that's it's one of those weird, they call it a smichut, I forget the English, but Torat emet. So you want to make sure you get that
Torat
Torat emet. Yeah. Asher natan lanu Torat emet.
Asher
natan lanu Torah emet.
And then this is the hard one. V'chaye olam nata b'tochenu.
V'chaye olam nata b'tochenu.
Good. Tochenu. If you make it a
Chenu.
yeah, tochenu. Okay. Okay.
V'chaye
V'chaye olam nata b'tochenu.
olam nata b'tochenu.
Good. All right. So let's do that whole verse. Baruch ata Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu tochat emet v'chaye olam nata b'tochenu. Baruch ata Adonai noten haTorah.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torah emet v'chaye olam nata b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Ellen, awesome. That's great. All right, Mime, you want to read it so I can hear it?
Sure. Can I ask a question first?
Sure, of course.
I feel like I'm really behind in grasping what this is. Does everybody do the same aliyah? It's the same blessing for everyone?
It's the same so the structure of the Torah service, right, is that we take the Torah out of the ark, right? We didn't actually discuss the Torah service in our discussion of the services, I don't think. So we take the Torah out of the ark. Actually, it's probably not a terrible idea just to back up a little bit and show this to you, and then
yes, if I could see where it is in the Lev Shalom, that would really be good too. What, 326?
It's 326, but let's start on page, actually, no, not 326. I'm sorry, this is the wrong one. Give me 1 second, because I was just worried about the,
This is all part of the Torah service. I'm looking at the structure of the Saturday morning service. This is within the Torah service part.
in the Torah service. So it's on page, I want to say 160. $168. 168.
Thank you. Okay.
Okay, so there's all this beautiful liturgy. I'm just going to give you the on one foot guide to it. Okay, the first part of the Torah service is called taking out the Torah. So there's a bunch of singing that we do. And then you'll see that in the middle of the Hebrew page, on page 168. Oh, Ellen, great, you're here again. Lovely. All right. All right. So we're going through the Torah service so that people who are going to do an aliyah have a sense of what's going on. So we sing Ein Kamocha, nothing compares to you, right? And then where there's a little red line, it says we rise as the ark is open. Right? So there's this very ornate, very complicated set of ceremonies we do, right, to remove the Torah from the ark. The first thing we do is we open the ark, we all rise, we continue to sing, right? So praise is the one who gave Torah to the people Israel in holiness, right? Very important, in holiness. Okay, then the next page, right, is there's a tradition in the conservative movement, at least, to have prayers before the open ark. We don't really do that at Worship and Study. They do it over at KI. Then there's this prayer that is known as Be'ana Rechetz, which is down here. You say Be'ana Rechetz, which we probably won't do on the day of the bar mitzvah because we're trying to streamline stuff.
Right.
But this is a beautiful prayer. It has one of my favorite lines in the prayer book, which is this one here, Ana Avda Dekud Shabrichu, right? And they don't even translate it. How weird.
Huh.
No, they do. Oh, I'm sorry. No, I'm on the wrong page. I am a servant, right? I am a servant of the Holy One, right? I'm a servant of the Holy Blessed One. Then we take the Torah out of the ark, right? And the person who gets to hold it, right? And then we have a call and response with the Shema. So the Shema that we generally say, that very often congregations say at all times, the Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad, right? That one is the one that we sing at the Torah service. The one that happens at other times of the service is actually not necessarily supposed to be that tune, but obviously things, each place has its local customs. So we have call and response, everyone facing the Torah, then everyone bows, the people holding the Torah bow to the ark, right? I always think that the reason we bow to the ark, right, is we're bowing to the empty space where the Torah was, right? Because there's always this danger with Torah, right, that Torah will become an idol, right? The Torah will not actually be the Torah, right? It'll become this fixed object, right?
Yeah.
And so I think this is gesturing towards that, right? That we're gesturing to the space where the Torah sits, right? This is where God lives. The space around the Torah, God and Torah are not the same, right? And then we sing this song, Lecha Adonai, right? And if it's a big congregation, which we are never a big congregation, but we'll be a bigger than usual congregation for the bar mitzvah, right? If we get to the end of that little paragraph, right, then there we'll sing a nigun as the person with the Torah walks around with it, letting everyone having a chance to touch and kiss the Torah. So traditionally, you kiss the Torah if you wear a tallis, you touch your tzitzit and you kiss them. If you don't wear a tallis, you take your prayer book, right, and touch your prayer book and kiss the prayer book. There are congregations, like the Chabad congregation that I used to go to in Dnipropetrovsk. People would, only the men, of course, but they would actually like kiss the Torah scroll, like with their, they would kiss the man. They wouldn't kiss the open scroll, right? But they would kiss the mantle. with their lips, which is not generally done around here, but feel free. Okay, go ahead.
Can, how do you know whether you wear a tallis or not?
It depends on the community you're in.
Oh.
So traditionally, in most sort of, shall we say, traditional conservative Orthodox type of places, right? A boy begins to wear a tallis
After
their bar mitzvah.
Right.
In liberal circles, right, that extends to women, their bat mitzvah. And there are some communities in which an unmarried man doesn't wear a tallis. That you only wear a tallis when you are married.
But at worship and study, what I was always confused. You put one on when you go near the Torah, but
that is the worship and study custom, right? If you go near the Torah, you have to put on a tallis.
Right.
That there are other places where that's not the case, but you need to cover your head.
Oh.
When you go to, so that was one of the reasons why in traditional conservative congregations, old school congregations, they have the doilies, right?
Oh, right.
A woman would put a doily on her head when she went up.
What are we doing?
Wear a kippah, right?
What are we doing at our service?
At worship, I think that you, Helen, as a member of worship and study, should have a tallis when you come up to the Torah.
Okay.
If you'd like to buy yourself a tallis to wear on a regular basis, that would be a wonderful sort of transition gift to yourself. And then you could wear it all the time.
I see.
My attitude is that if for members of the worship and study minyan, they should pretend it's a worship and study service.
Okay.
People who are not, they should do whatever their custom is.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead, Mayim.
So I understand that a talit is very special and made in certain ways and has certain words on it and stuff. I have been using a white and blue embroidered shawl that was my mother's as kind of a temporary talit. Is that okay?
Well, what's important about a tallis is actually nothing to do with the fabric and everything to do with the tzitzit on the head, right? So the four corners of the tallis have to have the tassel. Now, in the short term, Mayim, I think it would be difficult to tie the tzitzit onto your mother's shawl in short order.
No.
So if you want to wear a tallis, you probably should either borrow one or buy one. In the longer
you have some at
yeah. In the longer term, I think it would be a wonderful thing to get some you can get at the Israel bookstore or probably at Kolbo too. You can get a tzitzit kit that have the strings, right, and the instructions as to how to tie them. I've actually never tied them. It seems like the kind of craft that I would be really bad at with my clumsy fingers. So, but it is, you can do that, and I'm sure there's a million YouTube videos about how to to it. And I think that, and so depending on the material, you could either just poke a hole in the corners and tie the tzitzit on, or you can get and it might make sense to do this anyway, you can get little fabric squares to reinforce the corners, and then punch a hole.
Okay, thank you. I think for this time I'll borrow one of
This
the
point, I
ones.
wouldn't try to add that to the things you're trying to do before the bar mitzvah. Okay, so at this point, then in some places they read this Av Havrachamim prayer. We don't tend to do that at worship and study. And then the person who is the gabbai, the sort of leader of the congregation, says these words in preparation for the person coming up to do an aliyah. And then she says, Baruch Shenatan Torah la'amo Yisrael b'kedushato. And then the whole congregation is supposed to say this line, which comes from Deuteronomy. And again, this is also one of my favorite ones. You who cling to Adonai, your God, have all been sustained to this day, right? So everyone who is cleaved to God, right? All of you are alive today, right? And then it's time to say the blessings, right? So the person, as I said, will say ta'amod to you, and we'll say your name. The person reading will show you where in the Torah she's reading from, and you will she'll show you with the yad. The yad is the pointer, because you're not supposed to touch the Torah scroll with your fingers because the oil interferes with the ink. So you only touch it with if you touch it, you touch it with the yad. So, and with your tzitzit. So you touch your tzitzit, and if you don't wear a tallis, then you take the wimple. The wimple is the wrapper, right? The mantle is the outside piece of the Torah. The wimple is the thing with the Velcro, right, to keep it rolled. So you take that and you touch that to the piece and you give it a smooch. Then you hold on.
Wait, you touch what to what?
So the person
wrapper.
who's reading the Torah, right, will show you where in the column she's going to read from. You take either your tzitzit, if you have one, or the wimple, right, and you touch the place that she indicates.
Oh.
Right, and then you kiss. And then traditionally the idea is that each person who's called up for an aliyah is supposed to read that portion, right? Eventually it became clear, right, that we wanted to call up more people than were able to read the Torah, especially, right, when in context, including the rabbinic period, right, when the Torah was written in Hebrew and no one spoke Hebrew, right, except for when they were talking about Torah or if they were praying, right? That's Loshen Kodesh, right? The holy tongue, right? The holy tongue is Hebrew, right? But if we speak Aramaic or we speak Greek or we speak Persian or whatever, right, then we don't necessarily read Hebrew. So we want someone to read it for us. So that's where we got the idea of what's called the Ba'al Koreh, the master of reading. And this would be the guy that comes up to do the reading. But the idea was that even though you can't necessarily read fully, you should still follow along. So the person who uses the yad, right, will be moving the yad along like a little bouncing ball, on the television when they have words down. Right? So the idea is that you follow with your eyes what it is that when they're done reading, right? There's a particular cadence you've probably heard, right? Da 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 da. Right. So that little cadence, that means that she's done reading. So she'll still be pointing with her pointer. You'll do the same business with the kiss, right? And then hold onto the sticks again and say the second half of the blessing. And then you'll move to the side of the Torah, and each person stays up for two aliyahs, the one that they've said the aliyah for, and then the one right after that. Okay, and then we get to then we go through the rest of the Torah service with the Misha Berachs and the Haftarah and the putting the Torah away, which we don't need to go into now. All right. So any questions about this process?
You will have the alliterated Hebrew there?
Yes, we'll have the transliterated Hebrew there.
Yeah.
If you want to make a Xerox of your Lev Shalem or any other book, and feel free to mark it up with where the stresses go and whatever, and you can bring that right up.
Okay,
to the Torah. If you want to bring your own annotated version, that's just fine.
thank you.
All right.
Okay,
So I still don't know if I'm doing this. We have all these people doing the same, it's basically the same blessing, but
Oh, okay. So that was your question. I forgot about that question. Yeah.
Rabbi Jim, I'm gonna go, but
Sounds
thank you,
good, Helen. Thank you.
thank you.
Yeah. So yeah, Helen and Ellen know this, I think already, mine from being in shul a lot. So each Torah portion is divided up into 7 aliyot.
oh,
Okay, so the blessing is the same for each of the aliyot. So each person comes up, says the first blessing, says the first blessing, the person reads, they say the second blessing, then the gabbai calls up the next person. And the same process happens 7 times. Then there's a break. The 7th time there's a break after the 7th one. And then we do what's called the maftir. The maftir is usually the last 3 lines of the last aliyah. But sometimes there's special thematic aliyot, special thematic maftirs on holidays and stuff like this. Like, it might be about Passover. It might be about, about something to do with Purim, whatever. And that person, the person who does the maftir aliyah, is the person who's reading the haftarah, which
so
is
Fred's doing that for,
Fred's doing that. So that's why Fred is going to have the maftir aliyah, because he's actually going to read the haftarah. He's going to read the haftarah in English. So
I figure you have, besides Fred, Heva and Lori, Kent on Zoom, and
well, Kent's not going to do an aliyah because she's going to be on Zoom. So
because she's on Zoom, so she can't do it. So you actually do need another person to do
right,
it.
but there's no limit to the number of people we can have, mine, because we can have 2 people do it at once. Two people can come up together and support one another. So for instance, like there was, I can't remember now, someone was worried about it, right? So Ellen Soro, for instance, will go up with Lori, right? And if you were concerned about it, Mayim, you could go up with somebody who felt a little bit more comfortable with it.
Maybe with Anne. So we would say the blessing at the same time.
Right, exactly. And
Okay, well, I will practice the blessing, and I guess, at the rehearsal, we'll work out the order unless
Exactly.
you have that ahead of time.
right. Well, I'm hoping that Rachel and I can get all that stuff, together ahead of time, so we don't have to have, fights about it. No, I want this one.
So what I need to learn really.
No, I want to run away.
Right. We're also going to have to chain people to the table to make sure they don't run away. So no stage fright. I mean, stage fright is definitely allowed, but not to the degree to which you run away. I hope.
So basically I need to learn this on page 172.
Right. Exactly. And
I think that's not a problem.
yeah, I mean, again, in Mayim, I would not spend a tremendous amount of time on it. I would definitely spend more time on Ashrei.
Oh yeah.
Because I think, we can send you up with somebody else, and you can just follow along.
Okay.
Yeah. So, all right, great. So I have a few other questions for you. Ellen, do you have any questions for now?
Just one, that if it's more important that you go up with somebody, you can go with Lori and I can just wait.
Okay. Thank you. No, I mean, I really want you to be part of this, Ellen. So there's not going to be any, we'll definitely work it out so that everyone has a chance
Okay,
do this.
I just
And,
wanted to make sure.
yes, yes.
Well, I think Lori really wanted your support, Ellen, so you guys should stick together there, I think.
Good idea. All right, so
I love the thought of that.
thanks to
I'm
all.
sure Anne can be my support.
Oh, Anne is wonderful. So is Lori, but I was very surprised that she
So
did
Maya,
what she did.
so Ellen, do you have a Hebrew name? I don't know if you were here for, yeah,
Yes, Esther.
Esther. And what were your parents' names? If you're, you can choose.
My mother did not have a Jewish name so far as she knew,
Okay,
and no one ever thought of those things.
right.
And
What was her?
my
what was her-
father, I think it was Hillel or something like that.
Right.
His name was Irving.
Okay, but Hillel is a common one. And how about, and so what was your mother's English name?
Berenice. I
Berenice.
gave this to
Oh, you gave it to Rachel already.
yes.
Phenomenal. Okay. That's great. And Mayim, we can discuss this in a second. All right. So Fred and Ellen, we will catch up soon. Ellen, I'm still planning to come to Cambridge next Thursday. And Fred, I'm planning to come to see you tomorrow.
On the 3rd.
Yes. No.
Okay. No, it's changed. That's what I thought.
Oh no, the 3rd. Yes, the 3rd. Right, the 3rd.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the 3rd.
With dogs. With dogs.
I will do my best to remember. I will do my best to remember.
I know I'm a pest about that.
What is your what you live in the house at the corner of
2 Mount Auburn Street.
Right.
And if you go to the back of the street on sorry, I lose the words.
Yeah.
But if you go behind it, it's an easy place to stop because you don't have to worry about streets.
Right.
It's like a little garage.
Oh, okay. And I can just park there freely?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me just Putnam, right? Putnam Street?
Putnam, yeah. Just go down Putnam and you will see a big opening, and that's our where people do park.
Great, perfect.
And can you take my phone number with you so that you can let me know when you're coming?
Yeah, I have it. Let me just confirm, because I called you the other day, but there was no answer. But I think that was because
Verizon.
Right. So 617-868-7726.
Yes.
Great. Okay. Good deal.
Thank you very much.
Right. Thanks, Ellen. I'll see you soon.
Yep.
Bye, Ellen.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom. Yes, Shabbat shalom, including people on Nantucket.
Even people in Nantucket get to have a Shabbat shalom.
Yes.
All right. Talk to you soon.
I was there once for a holiday, and I felt like the teeny boppers had made me an ancient. That was in the 60s.
That's very funny. I'll be right back, Mike.
Wow, the 60s was many years ago now, Ellen.
Yes, but I can at least remember it.
They
I
made
felt
you
like an
feel
idiot with
ancient
all these
then.
teenagers. Did you say, or did the rabbi say it's something on page 172?
That's what page the Ali are on.
The Torah blessings are on 172, and we went through them. I think when you were in purgatory there, in Zoom.
No, what's going on is they need an entree to everybody's apartment today. So I hear them outside, and I left a note that said it's open. I didn't know what to do, and they haven't come yet.
Right.
So
sounds
crazy.
All right, so we'll talk to you soon, Ellen.
Mm-hmm.